Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Raymore City Council work session for Monday, July the 18th, 2022. We have a couple of items on our agenda tonight. First of which is the recommended amendments to the City Code of Ordinances and UDC. I'll turn it over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, sir. We just want to give the council an early heads up of some amendments to the code that we will be bringing and some of the items that are going to be in front of the P&Z for their consideration that will eventually make it to you all. And then both Mr. Zer and Mr. Gress will be giving you a kind of a general overview. We don't have specific materials, but of items that we are looking at for the future. So with that, we're going to be doing a little bit of musical chairs here for who's ever actually in charge of the particular section of code. But we're going to start off with Ms. Hill with section 280.020. Pretty simple stuff here.
Good evening, everyone. The correction to section 280.020, acts declared as public nuisances, is simply changing the time. It looks like it was an error from 10 p.m. to 7 p.m. So we're changing that to 7 a.m.
We think it's important that during the day the contractors actually be able to work and not.
That's
So
all I
you'll
have.
be seeing this one possibly as early as 4 weeks from now. And again, a lot of these are just cleanup to match where we had some disconnects between. The next one that you're going to see is actually on the ATV, UTV, what we call neighborhood vehicles. We had erroneously, we had a bad description in, and we don't enforce descriptions, we enforce the code. So we needed to bring everything into line with what we're actually enforcing. With that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Wilson.
So Mr. Fairborn already addressed my very first thing. It was to address confusion and give some clarification to the neighborhood vehicle ordinance. The first section is the definition section of 300.020. There was one change in that to change low speed to neighborhood vehicle. And then we go back to the 340 section, or 341.020, neighborhood vehicle and equipment and registration. This section lists minimal equipment. Number 9 and number 10 were added. 9, if the vehicle has a windshield, it needs to conform to federal standards. And 10 just lists the vehicle identification or serial number. Section 341.030, operation of neighborhood vehicle on public streets. There's 2 changes in this section, both E and F, from low speed to neighborhood vehicle. Section 341.040, and let me know if I'm going too fast. This is registration. Under D, this was changed to inspector as authorized by the city. And then again, under same section D1, neighborhood vehicle inspection list consists of, that's what it's titled, A through I were added. This was to mirror 341.020, neighborhood vehicle equipment. And we're currently working on a process to enhance the availability to the community. So.
Anybody have any questions? Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. So at the beginning, neighborhood vehicle, it references another section of RSMO. Do we know what does that say? I mean, I could look it up.
That
Do they have that
RSMO,
handy?
oh, sorry, go ahead. That RSMO is just the description of what neighborhood vehicles are.
Exactly what we have in here. And actually, it's kind of interesting. When RSMO went from low-speed vehicle to neighborhood vehicle, which it did a long time before we did it, they simply exclude entire sections that, and if you've ever seen RSMO, it's just suddenly becomes blank, and they say the date that it was eliminated from the RSMO. So now we actually mirror within here everything, with the exception of, and it was kind of a disconnect that we had too, as the deputy chief brought up, it was odd on the last page of this that we didn't have the full list of what needed to be inspected. Because we have it at the beginning, but then when we get to the inspection spot, it cut that short, which was very, very strange. So we wanted to be sure and at least beef that section up. An item that kind of goes along with this that I want to talk to the council about is looking at this brought up what we need to be doing about children on two-wheeled vehicles in the city, which has become increasingly a problem in nearly all of our neighborhoods. Wanted to let you know, we'll be bringing this to you ahead of that, but we're going to be bringing some recommendations soon on what we can do about those. Problem with those is they're in and they're gone, and because they're two-speed vehicles, they're gone so fast, enforcement is really tough. So in our discussions, it was identifying the areas that are, that we receive multiple complaints about and figuring out a better form of enforcement in those areas. They can outrun, if they get to a trail, they can outrun any of our trail vehicles that we have, so we need to be looking into that. The nice part about this one is, of course, we're in, whatever that vehicle is, it's a four-wheel vehicle, and we're enforcing, they're on the streets, so we're enforcing the law just the same way we would for any normal vehicle, and just bringing it in compliance with that. Two-speed vehicles still need to be addressed at a future date with council. And yep. Yeah, there's a whole section of RSMO, and we actually mirror it about bicycles and electrical bikes, which are separate from what we're talking about. We're talking about dirt bikes here.
Kevin?
Thank you. Obviously, Mr. Fairborn and the chief knows that there's been some heartburn as far as getting the neighborhood vehicles inspected, and I like that it kind of takes that away from just the Missouri State inspection, that we can deem whoever that process. But I wonder if we want to take it a step further. When you buy a new vehicle now in the state of Missouri, you don't have to get it inspected for so many years. If you bought a new, say, let me use golf cart for an example, but if you bought a new golf cart and on the receipt showed all the criteria, the seat belts, the mirrors, turn signals and all that, would that still have to be inspected, or could that have a couple of years where it wouldn't have to have an inspection?
I draw your attention to 341.040. In order to apply for a new or renewal registration under neighborhood vehicles more than 2 years old, that actually mirrors your vehicle.
But I would add that the vehicle probably will still need to be seen at least to run the VIN or the vehicle identification number, just to verify that that is the same vehicle, not a receipt of somebody else's new vehicle.
And would that have to go to an inspector to do that, or would the police do that, or how would that happen?
Well, I think that's to be determined yet. I'm not real sure how that's
Now,
going
the whole inspection process we're going to be bringing to you, we have some kind of really neat ideas for that.
John?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a constituent ask me, and he brought up the point that I think, is it $50 for the inspection? Does that sound right, Mr. Fairborn?
I think it's only 12, isn't it?
I think it is just 12.
It is 12? Okay. Then I got some bad information. But somebody asked me,
Go ahead.
The permit is $50 for 2 years.
permit is
Permit is
$50. Okay. That's what it was. And his point was that it was, according to this person, less expensive to register a vehicle than it was to register a low-speed vehicle. And if we would consider lowering that more towards the cost of registering a car, is there any thought on changing that price, or are we pretty set on that $50 registration fee?
Well, the difference between that and a vehicle is the vehicle has to be re-registered every year or every 2 years. And you get a recurring cost on it if you retain it.
I don't know what a vehicle is if you get the 2-year.
It's probably pretty close to that, if I had to guess.
Yeah, because ours
Is
is
it $12?
You'll remember we came to
Inspection.
the council and actually increased it to 2 years from 1 year.
Okay,
And all we did was double the cost that they were paying at that time.
all right.
Anyone else? Mr. Townsend, did you have some?
It'd be more for a newer, higher model car as far as the registration cost, so I don't know if we would be entertaining that idea or that methodology for golf carts, just as a thought.
I thought it was actually based upon the horsepower and make of the vehicle. I didn't think it was the age of the vehicle.
Yes.
It is?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was. Just,
I can't give you any clarification on that. I'll have to look into that. But I do want to say one thing. I was speaking with one of the councilmen here, and I would encourage you that if you're frustrated and you see these young children out driving these mini bikes or any of the vehicles, and they're young, not driving age, please call. I know it's frustrating when we show up, we don't see anything, but just by chance, we may be in that neighborhood at the time you call, and it'll give us an opportunity to address some issues.
I was curious about young people in these golf carts. We still have the vehicle. I mean, it's kind of like you have to be licensed, be 16 and be licensed to drive these things on the street, right?
Yes.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yes, sir. You don't have to worry about that.
We have to, we may have to remind the residents of Creekmore. I saw about a 12-year-old driving one the other day.
And that same 12-year-old is probably the one that's going up and down my street all the time, sir, with her little sister in it.
Anyone else? Any questions on it? All right, moving right along.
Thank you, sir.
Next.
Time for musical chairs. Some changes, long-awaited changes to animal control.
Thank you, Mr. Fearborn. Welcome, everyone, and let's talk animals. We put some teeth in the new changes in the ordinance, particularly wording that was provided to us by the animal control officers, making sure that we are able to conduct the proper enforcement for things like impoundment, abandonment, abuse, and neglect. But some of the other minor changes, the furthering of the language where restraint is considered something other than just a leash. We removed all the license requirements, have not been charging for those licenses for some time. And then fencing and tethering, you will see that the wording has been expanded fairly significantly because of technology, different types of technologies, such as wireless fencing and invisible fences and things like that. So giving the animal control officers much more enforcement authority for those situations where individuals are not good pet owners, we felt was important. And so that's probably the most significant change that you'll see in this section of the code. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anyone? Yeah, John?
I apologize, I don't read fast enough to catch this if it's in here. Again, another constituent asked me regarding this. Electronic leashes while you're walking the animal, is that something that is now allowed? Or have I just not got to that yet?
They're on the very front page under section 205050, where we just, in the in the section that gives the definitions, by leash or other means of restraint.
Okay.
We just wanted to make sure that we kind of covered all the bases. So when we're looking at an animal that's running at large, we want to cover everything. So, we had a number of constituents or folks, here in Raymore that said, my dog responds to voice commands. Well, that's good until they run away and they're not responding to voice commands. And so, we wanted to make sure that we were able to cite folks for the animal running at large, if they didn't have them under some kind of restraint.
Okay, thank you for that, I appreciate it.
Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment. Yeah, my dog used to respond to commands, but he can't hear me anymore. Can't hear even if I snap, he can hold. So I don't have control over him anymore without a leash. So.
Anyone have a question? Okay, moving right along.
Thank you, Deputy Chief and Chief. Next items are ones that are going to be kind of, Mr. Gress will first outline ones that are going to be going directly to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Some first amendments, and then the last one being a complete new item that's going in. And then he's going to be talking about, as I'd explained earlier, some other items that we're going to be looking at in the future. Mr. Gress?
Thank you, sir. Mayor and council, welcome again. Just wanted to cover, as it relates to the UDC, a little bit different process than actual city code amendments would follow, but I wanted to propose to you all some of the things to expect to come forward to you here later this year as part of the annual UDC review. The first one I wanted to present is kind of a cleanup. I believe some of you may be familiar with the large utility boxes that have been put in or installed along Foxbridge Drive, heading south into Raymore. When those got installed here a couple of months ago, staff looked into the code and tried to decide whether or not that contractor had to come back and provide screening for those because they are quite large. In researching the code, as you see in section 3 on the page in front of you all, the current code makes the distinction between commercial or multifamily zoning districts and has a different set of rules in terms of the height of those utility boxes that would trigger the need for screening. So by code, many of the boxes that you see out there are not required because they're not located in a multifamily zoning district. And so in staff's review, it was actually determined that that should probably read commercial or residential, all encompassing. And so that, a very minor change there, but should have a pretty significant effect as it relates to screening for those utility boxes. And again, this would be wrapped up in the annual review of the UDC, which me and my department intend to start working on later next month. And so again, that will go straight to Planning and Zoning Commission and eventually with a recommendation, hopefully make its way back to the City Council.
And Mr. Gress, what amendment will that be to the UDC?
Oh, I want to say it'll be the 28th or 29th. And more to come after that, I'm sure. Number 2, again, a pretty simple item to address within the code. Currently, as it relates to swimming pools, the code requires that those pools have a gate and a fence around them. Additional things include self-closing and self-latching gates. What the code says to date is that the gate shall open inwards, shall open outwards away from the pool, which in certain circumstances, depending on the design of the pool, the topography, any number of different characteristics can present a challenge. And so in some cases, the code official has, I will say, in a sense, waived that requirement and allowed it to swing inward towards the pool, not changing any of the requirements for the self-latching or self-closing gate. So this just cleans up the kind of confusion on whether or not, what direction does that gate have to swing. So it will be allowed to swing inward or outward. The requirement doesn't change about the need for a gate or the need for it to be self-closing or self-latching. But in conversations with our building official, that has been a code requirement that has caused a little bit of confusion over the last couple of years. Number 3 in the proposed changes deals with site trees or yard trees as you may be used to seeing them. These would be the trees that are required in the front yard per each dwelling unit, or in the case of a attached single dwelling, would be each individual unit within that building. It's 1 tree per street frontage. Corner lots are required to have 2 trees in that sense. Right now, the code is not terribly specific on the location of those other than the fact that they're in the front yard. And as you all know, you look at your front door, the entire yard looks like a front yard. There's been a couple instances within a particular neighborhood where that yard actually gets placed within the right-of-way between the curb and the sidewalk, which is not allowed per city code unless a very specific amount of right-of-way has been provided. We changed that, I believe, in city code to prohibit the heaving of sidewalks as those trees mature. And so this is a clarification. Again, we've had a couple instances where the builder placed that tree in the front yard thinking they were doing the right thing. Of course, we made those builders relocate those at their expense. And so this just further clarifies that the yard tree, which is required, street trees are not always required unless it's presented as part of a zoning request as some sort of an amenity. And so this just clarifies that those yard trees cannot be placed within the right-of-way and hopefully prevent that confusion into the future. I'll stop at number 3. Those are the pretty straightforward clerical changes of the code before I hop into number 4. So if there's any questions on those, I'll proceed ahead.
Mr. Townsend?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quick question on 3A with respect to the screening for the utility boxes. Does this, like you said, the ones that went in along Fox Ridge, I did get questions regarding, which look to be very large commercial boxes in a residential area. Does this speak to the utility company, even though it's within their right-of-way, to have to come before the city if it, say it gets to a certain height, utility box, or is that height that is there kind of representative of the tallest you can go before coming to the city?
So that, you're kind of speaking to the
For the
process,
size.
the process that staff would go through to issue those permits. When a utility company approaches the city to repair or replace their facilities, they're required to get a right-of-way permit. That's how the Public Works and Engineering track what's going on in the right-of-way. So they're required to submit plans of what they intend to install and where, and it's at that point we measure how tall are those boxes, and we make the determination of what they have to either come back and screen if they missed it, or just up front tell them what those planting requirements are from the start of that project.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else have any questions before we move along? Moving right along.
Excellent. The last one deals with an interesting topic, the keeping of bees within the city. I would say about once a year, the city gets a handful of phone calls from either people that are asking for clarification on what are the requirements because they want to keep bees, or it's somebody's neighbor who's calling to ask, can my neighbors have bees because they're bothering me? And if so, what are the regulations on those? So currently, the UDC is silent on the keeping of bees, particularly within residential districts, which is where we get the most of those inquiries. And so, in a little bit of peer research to a couple different comparison cities, these are kind of the 5 different stipulations of kind of dictate in a traditional single-family development. Obviously, we're not as concerned about agricultural zoning or large estate lots that have enough room to keep and maintain bees. This would be particular to an R1 single-family neighborhood. And so the requirements that are proposed before you this evening really are more locational. Where can the hive be placed? How large can the hive be? What other fixtures in terms of netting or shrubbery are required to, I guess, make the best effort to keep bees contained within the hive or within the yard that they're in. The challenge we've had here in going through this is obviously, as you're aware, bees fly. And so there's only so much that can be done to contain those within a yard. So the 5 requirements here are pretty common for the communities that do regulate the keeping of bees. But again, it's always difficult to respond to a resident with the notion that the city code is silent on it. And so these are the 5 regulations that we've looked into that would provide a little bit of direction on where those could be placed within a residential property. And that would conclude my staff report on those proposed changes.
Thanks, Kevin. Kevin?
Thank you. Are we aware of any HOAs or POAs that do not allow keeping of bees? Because if there are, we might want to add some wording in there that we're not in direct conflict with a HOA or POA.
I don't know any off the top of my head, and I would agree. There's a couple sections of the UDC where it's expressly stated that the city does not enforce the private, rules of a neighborhood. It's simply just the rules of the UDC. But I'll make note of that.
Right. John?
We've had this before. What do we do if we have a neighbor that doesn't like the fact that somebody next to them has bees? And I haven't seen this, but what if we have somebody that has an allergy, a bee allergy? I support this. I think it's great. I think it's good that we put it in here. Just didn't know if we had any complaints about them since we've last talked about this a few years ago?
No complaints about a medical issue. Have had, this stems from 2 specific locations in the city that are just repeat. There's a lot of bees, and there, as Mr. Gress so eloquently put it, bees do fly. And so trying to at least put some parameters on what they can and can't do. And as indicated, this mirrors a number of other communities and what they're trying to do there as far as limiting the area, the number of hives. Little bit of confusion in this too, in that we use the term zone for residential, but that also includes agricultural. And that's why you see the exception in item number 1 that does not limit number, size, et cetera, on agricultural property.
And if I could add just to your question, Councilmember, I said that the nature of the complaint that we've gotten reoccurring is not necessarily they don't want the bees, but it's the concern that the beehive is right up against the property line of the fence, and so the bees are in my yard. And so that was kind of the impetus for some of the locational requirements. How far do they have to be set back from the property line or a fence? What types of things like flyway barriers that I learned about would prevent or at least discourage bees from going concentrating themselves on that area of the yard. It's not necessarily that they don't want the bees, but they don't want the bees right in their yard.
Tabitha?
As someone with a bee allergy, I'm not opposed to this because luckily, because this is specifically talking about honeybees, they're not as aggressive as all the other. So to me, I'm not as concerned. I like the parameters of not having it right along the fence and stuff like that. That would make me comfortable. So.
Excellent. The other items, as Mr. Fearborn and I were, I'm sorry.
Did you have something?
Sorry. Is there a chance that people who are currently keeping bees, that they would be grandfathered in, or will this take effect to everyone?
Well, if they don't exceed the 2 hives, or they are within the parameters, they wouldn't be affected by it. Do we know if any of those are affected by the new parameters?
The one that I'm aware of, the only thing that would be affected by them would be moving of the hive closer into the yard. And that's one thing that we did discuss, is that even if the city does change the code, those that have bees right now would be grandfathered in, at least for a certain period of time. But like I said, the 2 instances that I'm aware of that I've looked into, it's not like they would have to get rid of their bees per se, but they would have to relocate the hive or combine hives or make those adjustments, but they would still be allowed to keep their bees.
Thank you. Will we be notifying those people of these changes?
Moving forward, that would be the plan. And as Mr. Fearborn indicated, it's a very routine conversation that we have every year. And so, on one hand, it's has the city implemented any changes to the keeping of bees this year? And on the other hand, it's can I still have my bees in my yard this year? So moving forward, we don't have a registration for people who have hives, but we would make the effort to notify affected people that would be impacted by it.
And in this case, there's the extra added, because they have to have a notice put up that they're keeping bees, we would definitely be notifying them. And we know where they're at.
Anyone else?
The last 3 items I wanted to touch on just briefly as staff continues to work through them for a later discussion would be 2 topics that would probably traditionally start with P&Z, and then one that would start directly with the council. The first 2, one of which would be the city's current sign code. There's been a number of cases that have kind of changed the way cities should be enforcing and writing their sign code. And so that will be a topic of discussion at a future planning and zoning meeting to discuss their thoughts on potential changes or additions to the code of different types of signs we might consider allowing. I'll give the example of the flag signs that you often see at businesses. Right now, they're generally a little bit taller. Right now, they're actually not allowed by code. They often look like a sail, if you will. The code, doesn't necessarily allow those, but in certain circumstances, staff does allow them because businesses tend to like those types of signs. And so those will be the types of things we come back and look at as it relates to temporary signs, business signage, and things along those lines. The other item would be any regulations as they would relate to short-term rentals within the city, meaning Airbnb or VRBOs. Not necessarily something that's become an issue within the city. I'm sure if you all have looked, there are a handful of those within the city. There's only been, I think, 1 or 2 instances where we've had to address those in terms of the topic was actually trash being left out, and so we contacted that owner and it was resolved. But many communities around the metro have passed regulations on Airbnbs, anything from outright banning them altogether to a licensing process or a notification process, and so that'll be a topic for future discussion. And then lastly would be a change to city code that would eventually come back would be tightening the scope around blasting activities within the city. In terms of permitting requirements or timeframes in which blasting can occur, number of blasts that could occur within a permit. If you're familiar with the Raymore Commerce Center, the project that's under construction right now, had to do a number of blasts. Not particularly an issue because it is kind of isolated on the edge of town, but as you look at other undeveloped properties within the city that have the potential need for blasting when they are developed, that's one thing that's been on staff's radar to kind of, again, tighten the scope around where blasting is permitted, under what circumstances we would allow blasting, and so forth. And so intended to actually have that for discussion tonight, but absent this evening is Mr. Krass, who is in charge of issuing those permits. And so we felt it was necessary that he be part of this conversation with the council moving forward. So that will conclude my staff report.
Great. Thank you, sir. Any questions? Mr. Holman?
Sorry. I had a question on rental properties within the city. Are there other cities that charge a fee for that? Because it becomes commercial activity at that point, and some people, that becomes a full-time, they just have the property, they don't live there and then leave for 3 months and rent it out then. They rent it out year-round. I'm just curious as to what other cities or municipalities do on that.
In my research, most cities make that a distinction between a rental home and then a short-term rental, meaning your rental home has somebody there, same person year-round, or 6 months out of the year, whatever the case is. Short-term rental is you have potentially 2 separate parties over a weekend, or whatever the case might be. Most cities do charge a fee for the short-term rentals. Most cities require, not most cities, but the cities I've looked into require a business license. Some cases, it takes it to the level of requiring notice to the properties that adjoin you in terms of a public notice and some sort of public hearing to get their support. I've seen it a number of different ways, and so the impetus for that is to kind of figure out how should Raymore be addressing that. But to answer your question, most cities do charge a license fee for a short-term rental.
They don't add a tax onto that then?
Not necessarily,
Each
but I've
individual
seen
rental. Okay.
it's really just a one-time fee to get the application. It is, some cities do it annually, some cities it's a one-time fee.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a good time to probably inform the council too that in addition next year to losing the 0.5% on our video franchise fees by state statute, we have also lost the ability to charge for home-based business licenses. So a tracking mechanism for that, it's minor amount, but again, it's one of those deals where the state keeps kind of whittling away a little bit. The tracking of the Airbnbs by using a business license will go away because it's about as home-based a business as you can get, renting a house out. So to do any kind of regulation on that, we're going to have to figure out how we know that they're actually there.
I think
And
that's
they're
great, because
notifying us.
Comcast was about to go broke, and so I'm glad that they were able to do that.
Yeah,
and
no
keep
kidding.
them busy.
Kevin?
Yeah, just a thought. Does our code have anything, there's a phenomenon going on now that's quite common. I've read a lot about it, where they take a home and cut the home up and rent that home to anywhere from 5 to 10 people, different people in a residential home. Do we have anything in code that would discourage that or us regulate that?
So you're actually referencing the case that was kind of the impetus for looking into this, where a city was presented with a business model of exactly what you just mentioned, and then their response was to just outright ban that type of business or use of a home. Right now, it would really probably be the building code that would, and I don't even want to say that it would prevent that from happening, but it would just, under these circumstances, this home could be divided up into 4 individual rooms, and then obviously the common area of the kitchen. So the code, in some cases, that would classify that as maybe a group home or group living, which is governed by the zoning code. It would be one of those things that we would have to, I would propose certain parameters of what would constitute that type of situation. A group home is only allowed in certain zoning districts, but a group home has very specific definition. So to address that, it would be probably to change the city code to create that definition of what that scenario would constitute and then regulate that based on the zoning of it. But right now, I think the code would be pretty silent on that exact type situation.
And one of the other items we will be looking at with that is the delineation between short-term and long-term. Because we have a lot of people in the city who have been renting a home for years and years and years. So where's that line? Where, is it a weekend? Is it a week or 2 weeks that somebody's in there? A lot of people use these, not necessarily in Raymore, which we have 5 or 6 right now.
I would say no more
Airbnb?
than 10.
So it's, down here, those are probably longer term. They're not using them as party homes for the weekend or anything like that, which is what we're trying to avoid and get out in front of before we do get complaints. So that'll be a component of it.
Anybody else have any questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, David. Moving right along. Next item is the question P update.
Next.
Good evening, thank you. Wanted to give just a quick update tonight on question P. Coming up on July 26th, I'll be speaking for a few minutes at the Raymore Chamber member luncheon, and on July 27th at the Belton Raymore Rotary Club meeting at Creekmore Clubhouse. I've had a handful of phone calls and emails, only a handful of people asking me specific questions. So I would encourage anyone who does have specific questions to contact me if they cannot be answered on our webpage at raymore.com/questionp. Going forward, we're in 2 weeks until August 2nd. I want our residents to have as much information as possible about question P, the financing, our city's budget, what the money would be used for if question P were to be approved by voters, what it would bring to the community. So I'm trying to get that information out, and I think moving forward, I will be sharing more information about the city's operating expenses by service, by department, so that our residents have a better understanding of what we're really spending money on right now, and what's really coming in right now. So really that's what will be coming next. I don't know if the second mailer has reached mailboxes yet. You didn't get it yet? It should be in your mailbox this week. It's the one that I showed to you last week really quickly at the city council meeting. And then we'll have one final mailer the week prior to the election, just a postcard with a little more information. So again, just would like to encourage anyone who has any questions to contact me. If you really want to take a deep dive into our budget, just remind folks it is a completely public document available on our website. We're even willing to have you come in and sit with us and look over all of the finances if you have specific questions that you'd like us to answer in person.
Would you like to talk about the journal, or shall I?
It's not going to be public until Thursday.
Okay. Then we'll hold on to that one. I would encourage anyone, and I told Ms. Harmer, if anybody has any questions on the budget and the city budget and what we are spending things on, because a perfectly legitimate question is, how come you can't fit all of these positions, make adjustments in your existing budget? Be more than happy to sit down and go through the budget, answer any question. Come to my office, sit down, we'll have a cup of coffee, and I will explain our budget, answer any questions that they have, explain to them what we are spending money on, and actually ask them the question. And I always think in any given year, it's a good question. What do you see that we could cut? Here are the projects that we do each year. Which one of these could be cut? We're already spending on existing personnel that we need to supplement those personnel, which is why question P is there. We're already spending over half of our budget on existing personnel that we need more of. Do we give up other essential services? Road, kind of giving you all a script against in the backyard fence there. Do we cut what we spend on road salt? Do we cut street preservation? I don't think we can do those things and be the incredible city and offer the incredible services that we do. But I would love to be able to show people the numbers that do that in great detail. So that offer is out there. So if anybody kind of comes to you all with that question, please send them to me. Give my cell phone number.
Yes, Sonia?
I think the big question or the big conversation that I've been seeing, kind of looking at it in both Raymore and Belton, is, and people feel unclear about what is the answer. So just to kind of have that conversation, maybe so we're all saying the same thing, or to hear it from you guys. So how much is this going to cost me? That's the number one question. And of course, that's going to vary because it's going to depend on what you buy and where you buy it. But so if it's not going to cost me anything, or it's not going to cost me much, then how does the city actually get money from this? Like, who's going to be paying it, I think, is really the big question.
On certain online and out-of-state sales, the amount is 2.5%. For every $100 you spend, you're going to pay $2.50. When you go online, currently, the state of Missouri and the county have this in place. They have a use tax on those purchases, just like what we're asking for in question P. If you look at your online bill and you see the state and the county on there, you would see the city on there. And in fact, our third mailer is going to talk about this. So if those two are on there, we're asking for our 2.5%. No different than they have for years. If it's not on there, or there's a sale on there that it's not applied to, you're not going to pay it to us on those either. How do we know how much we're going to get? Many hands make small work. Many hands add up to a large aggregate payment that we are going to use. And what's the use tax? How much is the use tax? That's all here. We need people. The council knows that better than anyone out there. What's it going to be used for? It's going to be used for people. That same state and county amount, we have been able to, we actually receive a city report of what those amounts are. That is being paid to the state for the state's use tax by City of Raymore residents that our use tax would apply to. If someone says, how do you know XYZ company that's supposed to be paying it is paying it? Don't people cheat the system? Does DOR find everybody who could be doing this? Just like with the sales tax, probably not. We have brought executive session issues to the council on some of those probably nots occasionally. The key is we know what DOR is collecting now, and we can extrapolate the number that means to the city as far as what we're going to be raising. Is that going to vary according to economic conditions? And gosh, we're in an awfully volatile deal right now, which is why we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver on what we're actually doing with the money. We want to make sure what we say we're going to do with the money, we are absolutely going to do, and hope for more. But what we know is, here is what was collected by those two entities from the City of Raymore residents. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but that's a sure thing for us. they're collecting from those people, we're going to collect this much based on what's already being collected. And we can go back to 2021 and look at that number, move forward into 2022 and find out how much that is and what we're going to be able to do with it. So yes, there are people out there who DOR doesn't know is out there. And yes, there are people who aren't going to pay it. And we'll get a notice on them like we get a notice on the sales tax on those businesses that you need to do something about this because, or DOR in this case, we've got them mapped, but we know they're not paying. There's a no tax due letter out there now. Just like what happens with the existing that is in place. So we can figure out those numbers. They're solid numbers that we have been able to calculate. Kind of 3 different areas there for you all. More information than you, hold on just a second. Oh, another big item on this. Please remember, this does not go into effect immediately. The statute does not allow us to start this until 2023. And we're still trying to figure out the details within that, but it's not like next, or 3 Wednesdays from now, all of a sudden online purchases are going to see this magical use tax go into place. At the earliest, it would go into place January of 2023. I am still trying to get an interpretation. For some of you who've been with us for a while, you may remember the quarter rule, that when something goes into effect, they don't charge it for a quarter. We're trying to figure out, get an interpretation from the state on when it passes on August 2nd, does that mean January 1, 2023 online purchases go into effect? Or because that's the effective date, are we going to be waiting until April of 2023 until it actually applies? We're trying to get that information for the final flyer, and we're going to have that information in there, and thank you for reminding me on that. Any questions with that?
I thank Sonia for bringing up the general clarifying some points. But with the use tax, when the voters approve it, be a positive affirmation. Because it's the language of the ballot is that in order for it to change the use for something else, it has to be voter approved to change, to use the revenues for something different, or can we, in years, 10 years from now, the next council decides they want to use the funds for something else, general funds related, I would say. Can the funds be used to do
The ballot language is simply what is going to be taxed on. We are telling the voters right now what we are going to use that for.
Yes, okay, that helps. Thank you, thank you.
Anyone else have anything?
May I add one more thing?
Sure.
So a month from now is one of my favorite nights of the year when I get to present the preliminary budget to the council. It is, in 35 years of doing the budgets, this is the craziest year ever. And usually I say that I'm worrying over it, but there are so many, including this, that we've just now talked about, factors that are going to play into what I'm talking with the council about that night. So bring a seatbelt and strap in. That concludes staff reports this evening, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything want to add? Melissa, anything else? Y'all done?
That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, and appreciate the hard work you're doing on this to educate folks. Anybody have anything other to bring up tonight? Nothing else? We'll stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.